What is up, guys? Welcome to Slow Your Roll. Things are looking a little different since the last time you were here. We brought on 5 new staff members. We're diving into every sport now. We got lots of ways we can go with this. I'm joined here today by some new staff members here, Tyler and Matt. Go ahead and introduce yourself, guys.
Hello. I'm Tyler.
Hello. I'm Matt.
All right, today's episode, all about the NFL. There's some stuff going on, some unexpected teams rising to the top, some unexpected names of the MVP candidates. Let's start with the MVP candidates. Tyler, what do you got to say about that?
Well, I think the biggest name right now to look into with the MVP conversation is CJ Stroud. As these last few weeks, he's picked up a lot of steam with his performances. And I think that's a good conversation to have. I think he's definitely made himself an MVP candidate. I don't think he's necessarily the front runner right now, given that Houston are 5-4. But I think if Houston can kind of pick up a few more wins, maybe get to like 11, 12 wins before the season ends, he'll definitely be an MVP finalist. But it's just really tough to compete when you have guys like Lamar Jackson, Pat Mahomes, and Jalen Hurts just consistently winning games and putting up good numbers game in, game out. And then you also have a guy like Tua who's just putting up a great statistical year. So I feel like that's kind of Stroud's main competition among the quarterbacks. Obviously, you have guys like Tyreek Hill, Christian McCaffrey, and A.J. Brown. But as a non-quarterback, I think it's pretty difficult to win MVP.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah.
Matt, what do you have to add on to that?
I think the main thing that I've kind of noticed with this year's MVP candidate is just like it's a lot weaker of a field. I think previous years there's always been like one or two guys, and the conversation is kind of centered around them. But this year, there's not really a clear-cut kind of favorite, and I think that's kind of paved the way for guys like C.J. Stroud, who's a rookie who you wouldn't expect going into the season at all to win MVP, to kind of enter the conversation. I know people talk about Tyreek Hill, Christian McCaffrey, but obviously they're having really good seasons, but I don't think they have the numbers, especially compared to like previous MVPs, where you would expect that they're breaking, records and whatnot so much that they would be at the MVP level. So I think it's definitely a weaker field. I think CJ Stroud definitely has a chance, like Tyler said, if the Texans keep winning games. But right now it's a weaker field, and I feel like there's still so much that could happen that it's kind of hard to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys both brought up great points there. I mean, CJ Stroud, his big differentiator between him and the other quarterbacks in the MVP race has really been the fact of his lack of interceptions. I mean, he's got two, right?
Yeah, he's got 17 total touchdowns, 2,626 yards, and only 2 interceptions, which is pretty exceptional, especially for a rookie.
Yeah, and I mean, the Texans isn't an amazing situation either by any means. I mean, granted, they're doing a lot better, but still. And on top of that...
Yeah, that's the only concern I have with him winning MVP is that they're 5-4, which like obviously for the Texans is very, very good given their situation. But you just out of an MVP candidate, you want to see like a top 5 record, top 5 team in the NFL.
Yeah.
So like if they're not going to achieve that, which they probably won't, your Stroud's going to need to have significantly better numbers than the rest of these guys. But I also feel like the media could also play a big part in getting him the MVP because I mean he's an exciting young rookie. The NFL needs that for views and revenue. So having a rookie win MVP, I think would be really good for the NFL. So I think that's why he probably has a pretty good chance if he keeps doing what he's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. We haven't seen that since the likes of Jim Brown was in the league. So that could be exciting to see. And Matt, you brought up a great point there with the fact that it's going to be really tough for guys like Christian McCaffrey, Tyreek Hill, A.J. Brown to have a shot at MVP. Just because it really takes a generational type of year for the media to even consider them a candidate. I mean, I barely see any talk about McCaffrey for MVP, and he scores a touchdown every game. So it's a tough situation. Right. Absolutely.
I think, you look at last week with McCaffrey, he had a good game, but, he had that first game, and, I don't remember how many games it was where he didn't score a touchdown. And I just think, he definitely has that opportunity, but he's not putting up the numbers, like record-breaking numbers, like you said, where he would be able to win MVP. So I think he's having a great year, but, you look at Tyreek Hill as well, like there's games where he gets shut down. He doesn't have a crazy game. If you're going to be a non-quarterback and win MVP, I feel like you need to excel and put up a crazy season. I just don't think anyone's doing that right now.
Absolutely, that makes sense. All right, so one thing I want to...
I feel like...
Oh, no, continue. No, you go.
Okay, yeah, so I feel like with that said, you have 5 guys right now, which is Lamar Jackson, Pat Mahomes, Tua Tagovailoa, Jalen Hurts, and CJ Stroud. I feel like those are the 5 guys that have a shot at MVP with Burrow down, Allen's kind of down and out of it. I feel like those are kind of the 5 guys that could win MVP. So how do you feel those guys rank amongst each other?
That's tough. I mean, I'd love to put Shroud at 1 just because of like the fact that he hasn't thrown picks, but I can't put him there. I know the media doesn't have him there. I know he doesn't have the hype to get there or the record to get there. But I mean, I think he's played phenomenally, and I think that most other quarterbacks would not be succeeding in his situation. So I'd love to put him at 1, but the reality is it's probably like Mahomes or Jalen Hurts with their records currently that are at the top.
Yeah, I would actually take a different take. I think Lamar Jackson's my number 1. You just look at what the Ravens have done. He has games where he doesn't have crazy stats, he doesn't have crazy yards, but I feel like he's definitely the leader of a team. I feel like that's something that, he really took on when he got that contract extension this offseason. He's become like the leader, definitely like the face of the franchise if he obviously wasn't already. They're doing so many yards on the ground, not just with him, but with their running backs. He's definitely leading the franchise, and they're, I think 8-3 now. They just had a big win on Thursday night, so he's definitely my number 1. I would like to say Jalen Hurts as well, but I think he's just throwing too many interceptions this year. So I think Lamar Jackson's my number 1.
Absolutely, that makes sense.
I'm going to have to agree with that. I also have Lamar Jackson at number 1. Looking amongst these quarterbacks, other than CJ Stroud, I mean, Hurts and Mahomes have thrown 8 interceptions, Tua's thrown 7, and then Lamar's thrown 5, which is a little bit lower than the rest of them, which I think helps him out a little bit, along with the Ravens. Just kind of, I feel like they're outperforming what people thought they were going to do. Like, obviously, the Ravens are always going to be a pretty good team in the NFL, but I honestly don't know if many people thought they would be 8-3 at this point, especially with the way things started over there. And I think that has a lot to do with the way Lamar's played, getting the ball to a lot of his guys. We'll see how that goes without Mark Andrews for the rest of the season, but I feel like right now he'd probably be my number 1.
Absolutely. I think I totally agree with that too. The Ravens have looked like a much more complete team than a lot of people thought going into the season, top to bottom. I mean, defense, running the ball, throwing the ball, everything has looked very good. So I think they're in great position to be contenders for a Super Bowl this year, honestly. So if Lamar continues this, finish with a very good record, I don't see why he can't win MVP.
But, yeah, I agree, but I think one thing, I know Tyler kind of brought it up that we have to consider is, like, I feel like every year, whoever wins MVP, you always see so much of them in the media. Like, the whole season, they're just kind of dominating the media. And I feel like really right now, the only person that's doing that is Stroud. I'd say Mahomes, like, will always be there. But it's just like, I do definitely think Lamar should win MVP, but it's like he's not really in the media to the point where I have a hard time seeing them voting him in. So I don't know.
That's a good point. But, we also got to think about all the injuries that have been taking place across the NFL. Mark Andrews just went down. He's done for the year. Joe Burrow just went down. He's done for the year. How does this shake up and affect the rest of the season?
Well, I think Mark Andrews going out is a pretty big hit to Lamar Jackson's MVP stock for sure, just because, like, that's his number 1 guy. That's his go-to guy. He throws a lot of touchdowns to him. I also think that'll affect Baltimore, especially, like, come playoff time. Tight ends, I feel like, are relied a lot in those early, tough, gritty playoff games. I think Mark Andrews would have helped them out a lot there for that. And then regarding the Joe Burrow situation, I feel like that just kind of puts Cincy down and out of it. I mean, they already aren't in the playoff picture right now. They sit, like, 10th in the AFC, a few games out. And I think just without Burrow, they're just not going to be able to compete with these top teams, given the fact that they also have a really hard schedule ahead. I know they play Kansas City again. They have to play the Steelers again. They play Cleveland again. I mean, they got a pretty tough schedule, so I just don't see them doing much without Joe Burrow.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I don't see Jake Browning taking the Bengals much of anywhere, to be honest. So I think at this point it's really get a good draft pick and continue to build around Burrow and what you got. So what do you think, Matt?
Yeah, first of all, with Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews going down is definitely a big hit. He's obviously his number 1 guy. But I really like their backup tight end, Isaiah Likely. I think it's his 2nd or 3rd season. He always plays well. Even when Mark Andrews is there, he has a lot of skill. Obviously, he's not going to be Mark Andrews. Mark Andrews is probably 2nd or 3rd best tight end in the league. But I think Isaiah Likely has a ton of potential. Regarding Joe Burrow, I agree with Tyler. I think, the Bengals are pretty much out of it at this point. They're last in their division. And obviously they have a super hard schedule. They have guys like Mixon, Jamar Chase, obviously, but if you don't have a good quarterback throwing you the ball, it doesn't really matter. I think they're pretty much out of it, so I agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and on the other side of the ball for Cincy, Sam Hubbard's been injured, and he's still out, and that's kind of a big playmaker for them. Like, he had the big play against the Ravens last year. He had the fumble 6, 99-yard touchdown, and he's just been a pretty influential player for that Cincy defense. So I think that's also a pretty big hit that just takes them even lower in the AFC situation.
Yeah, it's really been tough with injuries this year. I don't know what it is, but I feel like it's been all the big stars week after week that have been going down. I mean, it all started with Aaron Rodgers week 1 or J.K. Dobbins, whichever you want to say. I guess Dobbins was first, but those guys have been going down left and right. So it kind of has brought on the emergence of some of these teams people didn't expect to have the seasons they're quite having. I mean, the Lions are 7-2. Part of that, in part, being due to the fact they opened against the Chiefs without Kelsey, without Chris Jones. You got the Browns sitting at 6-3. I don't think most people saw that coming, especially since Deshaun Watson hasn't played exceptionally well.
Yeah, and he hasn't really played that much. I feel like he's been out for a few games. I mean, they probably have the best defense in the NFL. You could say maybe top 3 defense in the NFL. I think that's really helped them. But now Watson's out for the season as well, so that's another big injury. And just with DTR or PJ Walker, I just don't think that'll really help them either. They're currently 6th in the AFC with kind of Houston and Indy knocking on the door, and you still have Buffalo down there, who's a good team. So I just don't know if Cleveland can hang on to that playoff spot without Watson.
Yeah.
Just on the offensive side of the ball, I'm just not sure how much they can do.
Yeah. So I wanted to move on to a segment here called Fraud or Not. So I'm going to shout out some names. You're going to tell me whether you think they're a contender or fraudulent. We're going to start with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Sitting at 6-3 right now.
Yeah, I think they're fraudulent for sure. I think they have some good players, but you just look at a couple weeks ago, they lost 34-3 to the Niners. Like, okay, that's understandable. The Niners are such a good team, but if you lose by 31 points to any team, you're not going to win the Super Bowl. They'll probably win the division. It's a weak division. Maybe if C.J. Stroud gets the Texans together, they can maybe overtake the Jags, but, I see the Jags being a divisional exit most likely. Maybe they sneak into the AFC Championship, but, we just talked about how competitive the AFC is, so I highly doubt it. I think they're frauds.
Yes, and currently you're totally right about the AFC. I mean, currently they're the 3 seed in the AFC at 6-3, so that'll be interesting to see how the AFC plays out. What are you thinking, Tyler?
Yeah, I mean, Jacksonville's definitely got a good team. I just don't know if they're good enough to compete for a championship. I'd probably label them as pretenders as well. I feel like Trevor Lawrence has been a little bit inconsistent this season with getting the ball to his guys. And their defense has been so-so. Not great, definitely not good enough to play against these top teams in the playoffs. And they'll definitely make the playoffs at 3. They'll probably win the division. I just think they've been benefiting off of being in a weaker division. That's kind of like padded their standings a little bit, especially if they got to play a team maybe like Houston or Pittsburgh. Round 1 of the playoffs, I could definitely see them getting upset in the wild card.
Okay, absolutely. Moving on, Seattle Seahawks.
We'll start on this one. With Seattle, I think they're definitely more experienced than Jacksonville. I wouldn't say they're as fraudulent as Jacksonville, but I definitely think they're pretenders.
Okay.
I really only see 3 or 4 contenders in the NFC, and Seattle's not one of them. I think they're a good team. They have a very well-rounded roster. But I just don't see Geno Smith being a guy that can win you a Super Bowl. I think he's a good player, but I don't think he's a Super Bowl winning quarterback.
Absolutely. Matt?
Yeah, I have some personal stake in this. I'm a big Seahawks fan, but I gotta say, I agree with Ty. I think they're pretenders. You look at Geno Smith this season compared to last season. He's thrown way more interceptions. He hasn't been nearly as consistent as he was last season. You look at some of the games we've played. We lost to the Rams week 1, and we've rebounded since that game. We played them this week, so that should be pretty interesting. But, we barely beat the Browns. We beat the Commanders, who are not a good team, off a game-winning field goal. I think a lot of our players are playing well. Lockett and Metcalf have been consistent. We have some guys on defense like Boye Mafe. Bobby Wagner's been really good this season, coming back from the Rams. But, I think we're going to sneak into the playoffs as a wild card. We're not going to win the division over the Niners, but I can't see us making it far at all. I definitely think we're pretenders this year.
Okay.
But I will say this about Seattle. Currently, they're 5th in the NFC playoff rankings, and that would have them playing the Saints the first round of the playoffs, which would be the winner of the NFC South. And I think they can definitely get past that and get to the divisional round. So I think I could see them definitely getting a playoff win over a team like Tampa Bay or New Orleans, but I don't see them going much further than that.
Yeah, that's a good point, too. I think that division, the NFC South, is really weak this year. So if we can finish as the top wild card spot in that 5th seed, I do think we can win that game. So that's be pretty interesting to see.
Okay, next up, the Dallas Cowboys, sitting at the 6th seed in the NFC, currently right ahead of the Minnesota Vikings.
I'll go ahead with this one. I think they are not pretenders. I think they're contenders. You look at their offense the last few weeks, it's been incredible. Dak Prescott, he received a lot of criticism over the offseason in the first few weeks of the season, but he's been lights out. I just watched their game against the Panthers. I know it's the Panthers, not like a crazy good team, but their offense has just been incredible. They haven't even needed anyone. Like Tony Pollard hasn't really been involved, but CeeDee Lamb, Brandon Cooks, even Michael Gallup, and their tight end Jake Ferguson, they've all been lights out. So I think they have a really good shot. I don't know if they can push the Eagles for the division title, but they'll definitely be in the playoffs for sure. And with that offense, I think they can make a run.
Okay.
I think they're pretenders. This happens every single year with the Cowboys. The Cowboys are 7-3 every single year by week 10, and it just never ends up working for them in the playoffs. I'm not a believer in Dak Prescott, and I don't think he's much of a quarterback, to be honest. They have a good defense, they have good weapons, but I just don't think Dak takes them to the next level. And it's just, along with every single year, the Cowboys are always going to be pretenders unless something changes. And that's why I think potentially I could see Mike McCarthy being on the hot seat after another first-round exit this year. Especially Dallas not winning the division. Currently, they play the 49ers in the playoffs. I think that's another wild card exit for them.
Okay. That's some interesting takes there. We'll go to one last team, the Detroit Football Lions.
I'll start on this one. I think they're definitely contenders. I like what Dan Campbell's built there. I think Goff's a good quarterback, definitely better than Dak and Trevor Lawrence and Geno Smith, those other guys mentioned. So I think he can take them to the next level. They got a great offense, good 2 running backs, and their defense is just always going to be gritty under Dan Campbell. So I think that makes them definitely contenders, especially with the NFC. Like it would be Philly, San Francisco, or them. So I feel like you got to have about 3 contenders in every single conference. So that's why I think the Lions are definitely contenders.
Okay, Matt.
Yeah, this one's kind of tricky for me, to be honest, because I agree with Ty. I think their offense is incredible. Jared Goff, Pro Bowler last season, he was super disrespected, I feel like, when he was traded from the Rams. But ever since that trade, he's been really good in Detroit. I think he's a great quarterback. They have a great backfield in David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. They have great receivers, a great rookie tight end, Sam Laporta. I'm going to lean on the side of contenders. I think they do have a really good team. I think they're definitely going to win the division, so they're obviously in the playoffs. The interesting thing for me is I'm not fully sold on their defense. I know it was a while ago, but they put up a lot of points to Seattle, who have been struggling offensively this season. It'll be interesting to see how their defense stands up against playoff teams. Like, for example, I don't know who they could play, but the Eagles, Cowboys, 49ers. It'll be interesting to see how their defense stands up against those teams when it comes to playoff time. But I lean on the side of contenders, but I don't think they're a Super Bowl candidate.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, with the Lions, just the only thing I'm concerned about with the Lions is just a little bit inexperienced, and you kind of see that in the games where they've just completely gotten blown out. I think there's a Seattle game and the Baltimore game, right?
Seattle was overtime, but the Baltimore game was really ugly.
Yeah, the Baltimore game was horrible.
I think it was 38-6.
Yeah, there's a little bit of inexperience there, but I definitely think they're contenders. I think they can make a playoff run. They have a fun team. There's definitely a great atmosphere going on over there in Detroit. So I think under Dan Campbell right now, they're looking pretty good to contend in the NFC.
Absolutely. There's some great points there. Anybody else have a team they wanted to touch on before we move on?
Yeah,
okay.
I would like to talk about the Miami Dolphins because, it's been circulating a little bit that the Dolphins have really only beaten weaker teams. Obviously, electric offense, good quarterback, unbelievable receiving core. They have fun running backs, like just an electric team. But they haven't really beaten very many good teams. So I just want to know what are your guys' thoughts on the Dolphins and if you think they're really contenders in the AFC, kind of like Kansas City and Baltimore.
Well, first off, you just got to look at their strength of victory, sitting at a whopping 26%. So, absolutely horrid. Worst in the league by far. They really don't have many impressive wins, if any. They've beat the Giants, the Panthers, the Patriots, the Broncos, the Patriots again, and the Chargers by 2. So, the Chargers is their best win on their resume currently. So, And then they got the Raiders, Jets, and Commanders and Titans coming up. I mean, we're not going to see how good they are until they play Cowboys, Ravens, Bills to end the season, which I wouldn't be surprised if they lost all 3 of those games. I think they absolutely are a fraudulent team at this point in time. Of course, that offense is like sensational, high octane, high scoring every game, but I don't think their defense is going to outlast them in games like the Cowboys, Ravens, Bills. Their offense isn't going to be able to get that same output. They only put up 20 points on the Bills, lost by 28. So that's just the way I see it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I don't think they're contenders. I know you just listed all the teams that they've beaten. I don't think any single of those teams are over 500. I've definitely seen graphics where they haven't beat like an over 500 team in a while. So, obviously their offense is super fun to watch. Tyreek Hill, Mostert's been really good this year. Achane coming back from injury. Tua's been really good. But, yeah, their defense, I don't think their defense is good at all. Jalen Ramsey, I think, is overrated. He's definitely a lot older now. I do definitely think they're pretenders.
Yeah, and another thing to keep in mind with Miami is that, like, not many people think about this, but when they're in the playoffs, it's like December, January. They're used to being in Miami. Sometimes you got to go up to Kansas City, you got to go up to Baltimore in the snow. That's tough for them to pull off, especially not having much experience playing in the extreme cold as opposed to those other teams. So I feel like the home field advantage will really kill them in the playoffs. And just kind of another thing to keep in mind is that, like, they've had a few O-line injuries. I think they have 3 guys out on their offensive line, 2 or 3 guys, and they have for a few weeks. And if that continues, I mean, Tua already kind of has the head issues, and that could really hurt him down the road, especially against these teams that have really good pass rushers that are in the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
So, moving on to our next subject here. Primetime games this year. What is the deal with them? The under has hit in 22 out of 27 of the primetime games. It's been horrible, Fans haven't been able to enjoy their, Monday nights, Sunday nights, Thursday night games. They've all been snooze fest, low-scoring affairs that have been rather unexciting. What's the cause of that, and what does the NFL need to do to combat this? Is it getting rid of Thursday night games and just moving back to Sunday and Monday? What's the move?
I don't hate the Thursday night. I think the Thursday night's good. I don't think it necessarily has to do with the day of the week. I just think there were a few teams before the season started that were a little bit hyped up that shouldn't have been hyped up and got these primetime games that they thought would be fun teams to watch, such as the Chicago Bears, the Chargers. People thought the Jets were going to have Rodgers the whole year. Cincinnati. Teams that have kind of been struggling a little bit have gotten these primetime games, and they haven't really lived up to what the media thought they were going to be before the season started. So I think before the season, these primetime games looked a little bit better than they do now, but still, they just haven't been scheduled properly, I feel like.
Yeah, I'll say the Broncos and the Raiders have gotten a lot of primetime games, it seems, which I didn't quite understand going into the year before these games even played out. So that's really been weird to me that they decided to put those in, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think for me, I do agree that injuries, I think, are a huge part of it. You look at Aaron Rodgers with the Jets. He was injured right at the start of the season, and they have so many primetime games. I think they've played primetime the last 2 weeks now. I remember seeing them, so I think that's a big part of it. I do think the NFL has a big issue with Thursday night. Like, just this past Thursday, well, not this past Thursday, 2 Thursdays ago, like, there's no reason that the Bears and Panthers should be playing on primetime football. Like, no one wants to see that. What was it, like Tyson Bagent versus Bryce Young? Like, that's such a bad game. I think Sunday night and Monday night have been fine so far. But, yeah, injuries are a huge part. I do agree with the Raiders and Broncos. Raiders especially, like, with Aiden O'Connell, like, he's a rookie. Even with Garoppolo, like, that wasn't a huge thing that anyone really wanted to see. But I think there's definitely an issue with Thursday night.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the only thing with that Thursday night, that Bears-Panthers game is, like, before the season start when they got scheduled, you're looking at, like, Justin Fields, DJ Moore, the new-look Chicago Bears, like, this super fun team, the number 1 overall pick, Bryce Young. Like, that could have been a potentially fun Thursday night game, especially since, like, I feel like a lot of Thursday night football games aren't necessarily, like, the best teams going at it. But then just, like, the injuries along with just kind of teams underperforming have kind of weighed that down, and I think that has a lot to do with the weaker, especially Thursday night football games.
The Bryce Young situation is really interesting. I feel like that whole organization has been, I don't know if it's a result of Stroud or just the struggles in general, but they've been really, really impatient. They've gone as far to try to trade for, 31-year-old Devontae Adams or however old he is. It's like, what are you doing here? You're in the midst of a rebuild. You're sitting at 1-7 trying to trade for a guy that's going to help you win now. it doesn't make any sense, and it just shows that they don't really have faith in him, which I don't think helps the situation at all. What do you guys think about that?
I don't think it's fair. I mean, a lot of rookie quarterbacks that end up being great. Some don't even play their first year. Some of them struggle a lot their first year. And I think it's way too early to give up on Bryce Young. I think the Panthers fans are just getting a little bit impatient because they're seeing like the absolute greatness that CJ Stroud is, and they're kind of jealous of that. But Bryce Young, I think, can still be a very quality quarterback, and I think they need to give him time. Especially of a team that was in the Super Bowl 8 years ago. Not many teams have that opportunity. So I feel like as a fan base, they've had pretty good years, and they shouldn't be as upset as they are.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think, too, one thing that I've seen in the news is Frank Reich, he was calling offensive plays for like the first 5-6 weeks of the season, and then he gave it up to his offensive coordinator, and then he just took it back after the Cowboys game for this game. So I think the coaching staff, there's definitely something going on there. I think Frank Reich's a good coach, but there's definitely a lot of inconsistency. They're not one cohesive unit. Adam Thielen is a decent receiver, but he's putting up top 10 receiver stats in the league. Like, he's not nearly a top 10 receiver in the league. You know, he's kind of old, but Bryce Young definitely is a really good quarterback. I think he has a ton of potential, but he just has no help. I don't think the coaching staff is there. I don't think he has any good receivers to help him out. I just think it's pretty much everybody besides him. I think he's not as good as CJ Stroud, but he can one day, you know, be a really good quarterback, but he just has no help.
Yeah, and you got to keep in mind, part of the reason why these Panther fans are probably a little upset is because they don't have a first-round pick next year, and they're the worst team in the NFL. So they don't have that much to look forward to, I feel like, especially if you're a bottom team. Like me as a Patriots fan, these bottom teams in the league, you're looking forward to the draft. That's something you're excited for, to get a top player, and the Panthers don't even have that to look forward to. So, like, it feels almost like there's no future, there's no light at the end of the tunnel for them, and I think that's part of the reason why the Panthers fans are just really, really upset about this situation.
I think this whole deal with CJ Stroud versus Bryce Young going into the draft has been heavily affected by like the fact that people always say like, oh, Alabama quarterbacks don't pan out, Ohio State quarterbacks don't pan out. And I think the problem with that arises from the fact that both of those schools are surrounding them with the best talent in the country in college. So if you can't really get an accurate read on how good a quarterback is when all of his wide receivers are, Stroud had generational prospect in Marvin Harrison, and then Alabama's receiving room pretty much always ends up going first round the entire room. So I think that makes it tough to read. So I don't think it's as much of like a scouting error that caused like CJ Stroud to be so much better than everybody thought, as much of like there's no way to scout what we're seeing.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think you brought up a really good point about, in college they have the best receivers, best tight ends, best running backs. I think there's been a lot of quarterbacks, especially from those two schools, Alabama and Ohio State, that have been given up on too early. I hope Bryce Young, continues to get development in Carolina. I don't think they should rush him at all, but I think one thing they need to do is they definitely need to spend money in free agency. I don't think they're going to win next year, maybe not even the year after that, but they got to give him some help. I think they got to sign a receiver, tight end, some sort of offensive weapon, because I know they brought in Miles Sanders this offseason, but he's barely gets any touches anymore. He gets like 2 or 3 carries a game. Chuba Hubbard's kind of taken over as the lead back, so he definitely needs all the help he can get in Carolina.
Yeah, that offensive line needs a hell of a lot of help. They really need to get that set in stone. The run game isn't going to get better, and in turn, the pass game isn't going to get better, especially if Bryce Young's also facing pressure. It's just everything top to bottom needs a lot of help over in Carolina.
I agree.
Yeah, they need to protect him.
All right, so moving on. This is something I wanted to touch on. Next Thursday, we got Thanksgiving games coming up. What do we got next week? We got Lions-Packers to lead the day. What are your thoughts on that game?
I think it'll be fun. Lions-Packers is like a classic Thanksgiving rivalry, so no matter where either team are, it's always going to be a good game. I mean, there were the years when the Lions were just struggling and the Packers were dominant, but those Thanksgiving games would always produce fun games for everybody. And now I think this year with the Lions kind of being the dominant team, it'll be fun to watch. I haven't totally given up on Jordan Love yet. I think he's a little bit overhated by the media. So I'll be excited to see him on primetime on Thanksgiving, a big game. I think that'll be big for him in his career. And I think that's going to be a fun game to watch at the start of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do agree with your take about Jordan Love. The run game has been pretty poor, in my opinion, over in Green Bay, especially out of A.J. Dillon. I don't know how many yards per carry he's averaging, but it's not a lot. Yeah, 3.7. So he hasn't had a great year, and I don't think that opens up much in the passing game for a young quarterback really playing his first complete season. So moving on to the next. Oh, no, you go.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I do agree with you guys that Jordan Love still has tons of potential. I think this game is going to be interesting because I feel like growing up, you always see the Lions lose on Thanksgiving. That's like kind of like a running joke. But this year, it's a different team, and they got a hell of a team. The Packers aren't the strongest team, even though Jordan Love, I feel like, has potential. So it should be really an interesting game.
Absolutely. Second game of the day is Commanders-Cowboys. I think everybody probably is going to have a similar take as to the final result of this game. But I guess the real question is, how close is this game going to be?
I think it'll be pretty close. I remember a few years ago, I don't know if it was an upset, but I remember the Commanders beating the Cowboys. Well, I guess it was Washington football team, maybe at the time, beat the Cowboys in a pretty high-scoring good game. So, I don't think it'll be a blowout. I think Sam Howell could put up some solid numbers. He leads the NFL in passing yards, which is pretty surprising. So I think he could put up a decent game. I'd say maybe like a 7, 10, 14-point game. I don't think it'll be a blowout, but I definitely think the Cowboys should win this one.
Yeah, I think that, going Washington, that game he mentioned was like the Antonio Gibson like breakout game. He had like 4 touchdowns or something like that, which was crazy.
I was told that dude was McCaffrey for like 3 years straight.
Yeah. But the Commanders now have a horrible defense and a pretty interesting offense. So we'll see how they fare against the Cowboys. I think it could be a pretty high-scoring game, maybe like a 20 to 40-point game. I could see Dallas putting up 40 on them for sure, though, especially since they've been so dominant against such bad teams this year.
Sam Howell might be on life support after that game. He's already taken 47 sacks on the season. I don't know what he's going to do with Micah Parsons coming off the edge. So we'll have to see how the Washington game plans for that one. But the biggest game of the week is definitely going to be Niners-Seahawks. Matt, I got to start with you, the Seahawks fan in the room. What do you think about that game?
Yeah, my heart and my brain are kind of thinking two different things right now, to be honest. You just look at the 49ers track record against good teams this season. They blew out the Jaguars a couple weeks ago or last week. They blew out the Cowboys, and we just got blown out by the Ravens. So, to be honest, I'm hoping for the best, but I don't think this one is going to be that close. I think we could lose by 20, 21 points. I think maybe we could get some points in garbage time. Maybe our defense can get a few stops against Purdy. But, we always seem to lose against the 49ers, especially in primetime now and Thanksgiving. I don't think the Seahawks are going to win this one.
Okay. Tyler, are you in the same boat over there?
I have a little bit more hope for Seattle than the Seahawks fan. I think they'll keep it a little bit closer than he's saying, especially since they got a pretty good team. It'll be fun to watch, but I think the Niners will definitely take it. They're just so well-rounded. It'll be fun to see Chase Young and Bosa off the edge on Thanksgiving. I think a lot of people will be tuned in for that. So hopefully if Geno Smith can stay alive, they can hang in there and hopefully keep it within one score. But I think the Niners will pull it out.
Yeah, I think the Niners do pull it out. I think the biggest X factor for Seattle is really going to be how well they can neutralize Brock Purdy, because I think if you shut him down to some extent and all San Francisco has is the run game, I think it opens up the possibility of a low-scoring game that you can stay in and win. You have guys like Tariq Woolen and Devon Witherspoon out there, so if they can stay on Ayuk and Debo well, I think they have a good shot at staying in the game. I just think it will be tough to score in general on that San Francisco defense that now features Chase Young on top of Nick Bosa and then Fred Warner, obviously. So it's really just a tough opponent, and I think the best shot is completely neutralizing Brock Purdy, and I think that's how they've been beaten in other games. Like you saw at the Browns, Brock Purdy didn't do anything at all in that game, so I think that's the biggest story of that game.
I think we're in for a Christian McCaffrey 3 or 4 touchdown game. He always seems to kind of produce in these big games. I think we're in for something pretty huge from Christian McCaffrey, especially on Thanksgiving. It just feels like it's going to happen. And then I feel like with Purdy, you can kind of tell how he's going to play on the first or second drive. If he's rattled or the first or second drive, he is pretty much a non-factor for the whole game. But if he gets going, if he's confident early, like a lot of those games when he starts like 5 for 5, 6 for 6, he's almost unstoppable for the rest of the game. So it'll be very important for Seattle to get to him early and kind of try and throw him off his game a little bit in the first quarter.
Yeah, I definitely think the 49ers, I think they should incorporate the pass game, but I do think they need to rely on the run just because, you look at the Seahawks against the Ravens. Coming into that game, the Seahawks had like a top 5 run defense in the league. But one of the main reasons for that is because teams don't really run the ball against Seattle because it's not that hard to abuse their pass defense. Going into that game, we had such a good run defense statistically, but then you look at Mitchell, you look at Gus Edwards, look at Lamar Jackson, I think they ran for well over 200 yards combined against us. So, that's why I'm kind of being a bit more pessimistic. I just feel like whenever one part of our defense does well, the other part does bad. And like I said, against the 49ers, we don't have a good track record whatsoever, especially the last 4 or 5 years. So hopefully we can keep it close, but I think a blowout possibility is really, really strong here.
Okay. Well, I wanted to take a minute, open up the floor to some upcoming hot takes for this upcoming week. What do you guys see? Who are some guys you like? Who are some teams you like? Matchups? Anything? What do you guys have to say about this upcoming week as far as hot takes?
I think the Bears could put something together against the Lions here. I think this is pretty big for Justin Fields. He's coming back from injury.
Yep.
And with kind of the potential of them having the first overall pick, owning the Panthers pick, I think this is a big run of games for him. And if he's really built for it, which I think he might be, then he's going to really step up in these next few games and kind of sway them away from wanting to take Caleb Williams with the number 1 overall pick.
Absolutely. What about you, Matt? You got anything over there?
Yeah, one game I'm kind of looking at, it's not really a hot take, but I think should be interesting, is the Cardinals and Texans. Kyler Murray had his first game back last week. They got the dub against the Falcons, who are a decent team. They're not good, but they're not horrible. The Texans, obviously, Stroud's amazing, but can their defense really hold and contain Kyler Murray, especially if, he's at his peak? I think that should be a really interesting game to watch. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we got some really fun games this week. I mean, we got the Chiefs and the Eagles on Monday night, which will be good. And then Cleveland will play Pittsburgh, which is a big divisional rivalry. But I really think this Sunday night game this week is going to be fun to watch. Minnesota and Denver. On paper, you may not think it's going to be good, but Denver's been hot. They've been winning games recently, along with Minnesota. Both teams are kind of on fire and both making playoff pushes. So I think it's going to be a really competitive game on Sunday night. I think it's going to be a lot better than people think it will.
Yeah, no, I was looking at exactly at that Denver-Minnesota matchup. I really think Denver has a good shot. I mean, Josh Dobbs will really be tested. You got a corner like Pat Surtain out there that's going to be covering his number 1 guy. So we're going to see how that's going to play out. I also think that the Titans potentially have a good shot at beating Jacksonville. I mean, we talked earlier a little bit about how Jacksonville is fraudulent. Will Levis has a big game under his belt, early into his career. I think if he can connect with Hopkins like he did in his first big game, his first start, I think we could potentially see Jacksonville go down.
Yeah, I think that one depends on that O-line and getting the ball to Derrick Henry, because you want to get the ball in the hands of your best players, and Derrick Henry is still the Titans' best player. And he's kind of been shaky this year, and I think that's part of the reason, part of why their O-line hasn't been very good. So I think if the O-line can step up, that can really open things up for Derrick Henry, which opens everything up for the Titans offense and will allow Will Levis to also throw the ball downfield because they will have to respect the run.
Absolutely.
I think one thing, too, is just, starting off well. One of the reasons why Derrick Henry's been so poor the last couple of weeks is just because, the Titans get kind of down early and then they just kind of abandon the run game. Looking at last week, Derrick Henry had 11 carries for 24 yards. I know the week before that he didn't really put up anything either. So if they can get a good start and kind of keep it a close game and keep it a manageable game, I do think they could definitely beat the Jaguars, especially, like we said, I don't think any of us are really too sold on them. But I do agree with you guys about the Broncos and Vikings game. I think that has 2 teams that are really, it could be a huge win for both teams, and I think it should be a really interesting game.
Yeah, Dobbs has kind of got the hype train going for him right now. He's got a lot of love from the NFL. So primetime game, Josh Dobbs will be very fun to watch, and we'll see if he can really keep it going. Because this is kind of a make-or-break week for him. I think if he can keep going, he'll prove to everybody that he's legit. But obviously, primetime can break people, so we'll see how Dobbs handles it.
Yeah, and I think the Broncos, too, like you look at their last 2 games, they beat the Chiefs and they beat the Bills. So everyone was kind of writing them off, at the start of the season. Everyone's like, oh, Russell Wilson's washed. But if they can win this game and then keep that momentum on the 3-game win streak, well, 4 games because they beat another team before that, if they get the momentum on the 4-game win streak moving forward, I feel like, they could really be a playoff candidate out west.
Yeah, they can definitely make a playoff push with teams like Cleveland losing their quarterback, Cincy losing their quarterback, Vegas losing their quarterback. A lot of teams are going down players, and I think the Denver could maybe make a late push for the wild card. That'll be a good thing to keep in mind.
Absolutely. Lots of good points there. We're about at that time, boys, where we're going to start wrapping up. Is there any closing remarks you guys wanted to make or some shout-outs you wanted to give while you were here?
I think Monday Night Football, Philly and Kansas City. I think we're going to see Kansas City get exposed a little bit against Philly. It'll be a fun game, but I think Philly's going to expose Kansas City and really open things up for the rest of the AFC here.
All right. Well, on that note, everybody, thank you for tuning in today. First episode. Next week, we're going to be diving into some college football and some NBA. Then we'll go back to the NFL after that. So hope you all join us for that. Go ahead and follow the socials on screen. Y'all have a great rest of your day.